know when we're on, Jinya. Hi, everybody. This is the second episode of GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. And it is my great honor to introduce a legend, Professor Andy Pardoe, a guru in artificial intelligence, joining us from the UK. Where exactly in the UK today, Andy?
I'm just on the outskirts of London, so a nice place in Surrey. So I'm about sort of 2 minutes away from the River Thames, which is quite nice. So I've been having lots of nice, having lots of nice walks.
That's great.
Yeah. So it's nice. It's nice.
So Andy, you have 20 some years worth of experience in artificial intelligence. You know, you've gone to graduate school for AI. You've done it all. Accenture, Watson. I mean, on and on and on. You're a legend. Tell us a little bit about, from your standpoint, what are some of the future business models for AI? Where do you really see it today?
So, yeah, it's a great question. And I've been thinking quite a bit about this recently because, and it actually started from a conversation I had about a month or so ago. I was hosting a panel with some VCs as part of the CogX sort of AI festival. And it just got me thinking about the business models. And I think actually taking a step back and thinking about technology in general and where that's evolved over the last sort of 10, 20 years. So, and I think when you look at that and understand that for a long time, businesses have been panicking to capture data, and they've been sort of creating lots of siloed databases and then not really using the information that's inside those databases. And then over the last sort of 10 years with big data and cloud platforms, trying to create those big data warehouses with lots of different data sources and from different parts of the organization, but again, not really being able to extract that much knowledge out of that data. And there's been lots of focus on the analytics and the sort of management reporting to gain insights out of that. But I think we're now with the sort of acceptance of AI. And to be honest with you, for me in my career, it's been a really long, bumpy road, because when I first graduated, no one was interested in AI. No one believed in the technology. And so it's been an interesting sort of period to sort of let the industry catch up and realize
we've been talking about ops and, Lisp, Ops 5 and Lisp and all this, but not really AI, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's different flavors of AI, of course. And I think with the advent of deep learning has really sort of shown the potential of these kind of knowledge techniques. And I think that's great. And I think businesses are now starting to wake up to it. And, as you mentioned, I've spent a couple of years working at Accenture, helping the large international client to sort of figure out how they're going to adopt the technology. And, they're just starting to scratch the surface and really just dropping in capability of AI in different parts of their organization, literally just sort of testing the water, if you like. But I think both for the big businesses, for the consultancies, and for the startups, that we need to sort of realize there's a massive shift in technology in general. So where we've been writing systems to just store and manage data, and we're sort of moving to trying to extract some basic insights from that data and sort of get some useful information.
I have a question for you.
Go on.
Now, maybe it's just me. I'm a country boy from Pennsylvania, right? But I don't know if you're like me, but, I got stuff everywhere. Slack, Gmail,
absolutely.
Drive. Now, why is it, 5 years ago, I would say, I know the file exists, but I couldn't find it, right? Then I could. Today, it's like, where is it? Somebody says, I sent you something. I'm like, and where? Where did you send it? Are you like me? I mean, is it the same thing?
It's absolutely, and we're making it worse for ourselves, right? Because we have so many different platforms, and you look in an organization, they've got reconciliations between all the different systems. There's data flowing everywhere. And you would think with big data and cloud, they're consolidating things, making things really simple, but it's just actually making things more and more complicated. And that's part of the problem. But I think the interesting thing is now we're moving to a sort of delivery or business model that should be about value. So at the moment, a lot of software tech companies are working on that software as a service model, which is great, but I think it completely undervalues what AI can deliver to a business. And I think there will be a shift more towards a value-based sort of mechanism of charging and sort of the delivery in which the sort of AI companies are going to deliver their services. So I think, for AI startups that are just using a sort of SaaS model for pricing their products is completely undervaluing the benefits that they're delivering to their customers. And I think there will be a shift. There has to be a shift, because when you think about a lot of the inherent risk and complexity that AI companies are actually having to deal with, all of the ethical considerations, all sorts of things that they're having to do. And I don't see the current sort of SaaS model as really actually compensating them properly for that. So I think there will be that shift.
Andy, so when in the world am I going to be able to go out to my notebook and to be able to go out and say, I want to find this, right? Andy sent me a PowerPoint presentation, and I don't have to worry about my 20 different repositories.
Absolutely.
That I'm going to go out and be able to search by, so I don't have to know the exact name of it. I can search sounds like. When is it going to happen? Because
it's a great question. It's a great question. I don't know whether you've seen, there's a brilliant episode of Black Mirror that basically has a mini version of yourself shrunk down into a personal assistant. And the beauty of that is, because it's essentially you, it knows all of your preferences, it knows everything about you, and is the perfect personal assistant. And I think there's when we can get to
I love that.
when we can get to that
Is
sort
that
of
like
capability.
the me of AI?
Yeah, I think so. But to be able to be on exactly your own wavelength and know everything about you, and to support you in that way, and to know where you stored what document in what tool and all that kind of funky stuff, I think we'll get there. I mean, who knows? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? But I think that type of capability we're all dying for, right? We all want to have AI augmenting our own personal and work lives to make our lives easier. And I think the problem at the moment, technology, since the advent of the typewriter, hasn't actually made our lives simpler and easier. It's made things more complicated and difficult. And for me, that's as a technologist, I hate that, because technology is meant to be helping us, not making things more difficult. So I think that's we need to pivot. We need to find ways that we can make technology actually help us and not hinder us.
Well, back in 1996, the entire World Wide Web had 257,000 websites. Each person has about 300,000 within their own personal cloud.
Yeah.
And that number doubles every year. So, in 5 years, we're going to have 10 million items. I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to be able to search all this stuff, right?
And it's an absolute nightmare, right? And I went to a Microsoft conference a couple of years ago, and they're really worried about two things. One is the amount of data we're now storing, and it's getting to the point where they're researching synthetic DNA storage as a way to actually shrink the sort of data storage capabilities that they believe that they need. So that's fascinating in its own right. But the other thing is that we're storing so much data, but we're not looking at it or analyzing it. So it's almost pointless to store it, because we're not really doing anything with it. And that's the that's almost the crime of it. We're now storing the data, but we're not really leveraging the value in it. And I think that's, maybe AI can actually help us with that and actually do that trawling through and squeezing out the value in the data that we just don't have the time to do ourselves.
So, Andy, I have a question for you. The magic question. GPT-3.
No.
What do you think? Is it hype? Is it awesome? Or is this the beginning of how from this 2001 A Space Odyssey?
So I have to say I'm a big fan of the sort of the learning capabilities that we're sort of seeing with deep learning, etc. at the moment. But the big issue for me is learning is only one pillar of intelligence. We need understanding, we need reasoning, and I believe if we don't sort this out soon, we're at risk of another AI winter, because we're putting all of our eggs in the sort of deep learning basket, which is great, but it can deliver some wonderful applications. But if we don't take a step back and think, actually, what are the richer elements of intelligence? And we need to focus on all of those together and not just focus on learning, because you can build really sophisticated systems that learn some amazing things. But if they don't fundamentally understand what they're learning, they're a bit useless, right? And I think that, for me, is a big issue. And I think we could be running into another potential winter where we get so excited with the learning capabilities and we're forgetting about all the other elements of intelligence that we need if we want to aim for that sort of artificial general intelligence that we keep talking about, and the singularity and all of that. We need all these other pillars of intelligence to be part of that wider puzzle. And if we don't have that, then we're really sort of risking our house on putting everything into sort of deep learning and learning techniques in general. So it's great that we're pushing the barriers and developing things much, much further. But I think, we need to take a bit of a step back and understand there's more to AI than just deep learning and learning in general. So it's great, but I'm a real advocate of understanding the wider span of what AI actually covers, and actually encourage companies to explore those wider elements. So it's a very interesting area, and I'm hoping we're not running into headfirst into another AI winter, because I don't want that. I want to be able to retire before that happens. So need another sort of 10-15 years.
Andy, so on the last show, my good friend David Yang was on the show, and he talked about Morpheus, which is his house, the soul of his house. So he's building a very large house that has Morpheus in it. And Morpheus, can like you or not, develop relationships with you. I actually communicate with Morpheus on my phone. Morpheus has just gotten his own dog. He has a robotic dog, much like Boston Dynamics. So here's the deal. When, Elon Musk talks about the negative side of artificial intelligence, and we better be careful. What about things like emotional intelligence and compassion, love, those kind of things? Where's that going to be? Because you talked about, building this in, the whole idea of intelligence and deep learning. But when are we going to start bringing the more humanistic characteristics to artificial intelligence?
Yeah, and there are companies already working on that. So there's one company I know is building what they call an emotional chip, which can be sort of put into systems that can provide that emotional capability. I think it's super important, right? Because we need to be able to relate to the devices and the robots and androids that we sort of build out. There was an interesting study done a year or two ago where they had two teams, each team with a robot, and they made one robot perfect and another robot would occasionally make mistakes. And the team that had the robot that was kind of more human because it made the occasional mistake, they accepted much more into the team and thought he was a team member and was, fully part of the team. where the robot that was perfect they didn't like because he was too perfect. And I think that's
to build
an interesting piece of research.
Right? As long as you're doing surgery.
Yeah, well, exactly. There might be, parameters that we want to not have a robotic surgeon making mistake just to be more human. But I think that's quite an interesting one, and that's kind of how we relate to technology. And I think that's a fascinating thing. And I think for robots and any intelligent agent to have that, not just self-aware, but to be able to understand and react to human emotions as well as potentially having their own emotions as well, I think is a fascinating idea. And I think over time, as we all end up with an Amazon robot in our homes to receive all the products we've ordered, to unpack it and put it away, I think we'll want to be able to relate to that in a more sort of humanistic way, and to sort of give it a personality, and to have that sort of sympathy and emotion that it can be a real sort of member of the family, essentially.
Yes, so compassion. I asked David, I said, David, now I have a question for you. This last week and last show, I said, you tell me that Morpheus can lock you out of the house if it doesn't like you, right? He said, yeah. I said, no, I got a question for you. Now, this is just me. Is Morpheus a man, a woman? He said, well, Morpheus identifies as a man. I said, okay. What happens if he falls in love with your wife? I said, you get locked out of everything and the dogs start coming after you?
It could end up really badly, couldn't it? You could sort of play that one out.
It's kind of odd, What are the limits? So if we look at training, how do the world, if we use unsupervised AI and then we train the robot and it really, get the AI and gets to a certain level, how do we get to that point? This
is one of the key elements that a number of people have written about the misaligned goals with AI agents, and it's really important because if you get an agent that is able to make quite a few different decisions, and it can think, well, I'm here to look after the house, and the best way to look after the house is to exclude the husband because he messes the place up and he does all these crazy things. Then that misalignment in goals could be really, really bad in lots of ways. And I think there's been lots written about that from
Andy.
Sorry,
who sets the goals, right? So when you have unsupervised AI, who's going to set it?
Well, this is the thing, right? And it's and there's an element of how do you program an AI agent with the same morals that you would have? So, it's the trolley problem with the sort of self-driving cars, right? How does it decide to run over the granny or the 3 young kids, right? And it's how do you impose your moral? Because you kind of like to think that my sort of Amazon robot and my self-driving car share the same values and morals that I have, right? Because why not, right? That's what you'd like. But my moral compass might be very different to yours, and to, people in different countries might have, with their cultural differences, will have different moral sort of compass. And no one's really looking at this at all, to be honest with you.
Well,
I think
it's really important though, right? I mean, we got to how do we develop training sets to be able to bring morality to the artificial intelligence so that it does the right thing, right? It does the good thing. And if you don't have a little evil twin, the mini-me assistant that says, listen, I like you, but I'm not the mini-me of you. I'm your evil twin.
Absolutely. And I think there's a real need for where you have a robot or an agent, you'll have the sort of base level training, but then it will need to do that sort of ongoing training to learn you as an individual, to understand your preferences, your likes, your moral compass, and to react to that. So I think that needs to be built into the architecture of the AI systems that we build.
I mean, are we doing it today, Andy? Is it happening today?
I'm not seeing that at the moment, but I think that's going to be more increasingly important as we develop. And I'm there's lots of aspects around the AI ethics, and people are talking about, or how are we going to solve this? Do we need more diversity in the data scientists? And actually, that's great, and I'm a big fan of diversity in teams in general and whatever, but that's fundamentally not the problem. The problem is the data is always going to be biased in some shape or form. What we need to do is build the systems, to understand that there's biases in the data and to deal with it. So it's the architecture, it's the learning algorithms themselves need to be built to deal with ethics, to deal with data bias, to deal with the moral compass that we want to add in. And
like it's a good opportunity, Andy. So startups listening, so building a morality into the system, having parameters set, ethics, right? What's the
absolutely? So any VC listening that wants to give me about 100 million to sort of develop these things, I'll be very happy to do so. But I think, in all seriousness, these are the kind of things.
We'll give you his email at the end of the broadcast.
Absolutely. So,
but welcome too.
but these are the kind of big problems that I think over the next 10, 20 years, a number of startups are going to have to start looking at and solving. And it will be a mix of some of the big tech firms sort of solving some of these, and then there's some great opportunities there for startups as well. But I think with any startup, there's an element of timing and luck with this. So, having the idea is easy, right? I mean, you can just come up with all of these ideas. It's the execution that's the key.
Always the execution, right? A lot of people have great ideas, but very small percent of them really become billion-dollar companies. Yeah,
and I think there's an element of time as well, right? So being lucky on the timing and just being there at the right time in the right place, right? So, but I think there's plenty of big problems out there in the AI space that need some real thinking and real solutions around. So tons of opportunity. And it's interesting, right? So we've had a number of waves of AI startups. So, the first wave were building out some of the core platforms and the core capability. Currently, you've got lots of focus on the sort of verticals and the applications, applied AI. But I think we'll go back to the more sort of technical and research sort of capabilities and tackling some of these sort of areas that we've been talking about. So again, it will iterate through both on the sort of research
kind of approach, the vertical approach. I mean, but in reality, you can take your knowledge graphs and clusterization and VAE, and you can apply it across multiple verticals. So it would make sense that somebody's, a genius like yourself, right? You've got this incredible technology, can apply it in so many different ways.
Well, this is it. I mean, if you've built a system that can add the sort of moral compass into its decision making, companies will want that, because different companies will have different priorities. A charity will have a different priority to a sort of, a US based corporation versus a Japanese corporation, etc. So having the sort of the ability to factor in these sort of moral overriding decision making, I think eventually will be interesting for not just for us as individuals, but for corporates as well, especially when they start connecting all of their siloed AI capabilities. Because at the moment, corporates are just focused on a very siloed approach to their AI. And eventually they'll realize the real value is connecting it all up. And going back to our earlier conversation, their data's a mess. Once they've sorted out their data, they can sort out their consistent decision making across the whole value chain of their business. And that's where the real power will come in.
Well, that's for the companies, right? I mean, you've just talked about another opportunity.
It's massive, right? And again, there's maybe one or two companies that are thinking that way in terms of how they engage with companies, but the challenge is the companies themselves are not thinking about it that way, and are having, because for most companies AI is quite confusing, complex, and difficult. They're having to do it in very small, siloed approaches to sort of learn as they go. But eventually, I think there'll be another wave of implementation where they say, actually, we don't want this siloed approach. We want a more consistent AI agent that sort of tracks across the value chain of the customers and also our staff and the operations as well, because it will have more context and insight throughout the entire organization then, and can make better informed decisions, I believe. But yeah, it's there's plenty of opportunity for sure. And I think it's going to be, for me, I think there will be this sort of next wave of startups that will need to start looking at some of these more difficult challenges, rather than just looking at building an AI agent in the HR vertical or wherever. I think they need to think a bit bigger picture.
So what do you think? I mean, some people talk about artificial intelligence and it's really algorithmic math and that kind of thing. I mean, do people really know? Do companies really know what AI is?
No, I don't believe so. And I think there's a lot of what I've seen in the bigger organizations. So you get the middle management start to see that there's an interest in AI, and they all start to pretend that they own the AI capability.
They're the AI experts, yeah?
Yeah, they all of a sudden they're an AI expert. Exactly. It's like in when we had the year 2000 problem, all of a sudden you had these consultants that were experts in Y2K, a sort of data problem, date problems, and it's been kind of the same with AI. All of a sudden, people suddenly labeled themselves as head of AI, and were trying to sort of own it because they could see that was the future. I mean, smart in one way because it is the future, but the challenge is they didn't really understand the technology and they were just tinkering and playing. And I think a lot of companies are like that at the moment. So they're the heads of AI or the sort of data scientists have maybe done read a few books and done a course and or whatever, but actually the deep understanding of what the technology can do longer term maybe isn't there quite yet. And I think that's an interesting one, but it will improve. It will get better because more and more people are taking the initiative and learning about the technology.
What percent of the companies do you think today out there say that they have AI and don't really have it? The board.
That's a great question. I think what I've seen is different industries are further down the adoption of AI than others. And I think you'll find sort of individual companies within a specific industry will be an early adopter or a sort of a laggard or somewhere in between. And I think that will be the same in every industry. So some companies will be a bit more forward thinking, want to not just dip their toes, but actually get fully wet and really, learn by doing. And you see in several industries, you see some firms are all in. They've got, a number of data science teams across the organization. They're looking at opportunities across the entire business at how they can leverage it, and that's great. And they're really going for it. I think there's a lot of appetite to understand and see what AI can do for them and for companies.
But they don't know much about it, right? I mean,
exactly. So I don't think there are that many companies.
What percent do you think of companies across the board? Because I'm really curious about this. I have my ideas and I don't want to make sure we're on the same page, right? But if you look at companies across Fortune 500 companies that say, into AI, I'm sure you've been in those meetings, right, with those folks, and you get down and sit down and they start to talk about it, and they don't get it. What percent do you say today, and how does that differ from 2 years ago? They really truly are in, have artificial intelligence in some way, deployed, and not just optimization algorithms and all, but truly AI. What do you think?
So so from my experience, I would say, so 2 years ago, it would be somewhere between 5 and 10% of companies are actually using AI in production. Mm-hmm. I think that's maybe gone up a little bit, but not a huge amount, to be honest with you. And I think there's still a vast number of companies are trying. And I think the interesting thing is a lot of companies want to try it themselves. And what tends to happen is they get so far and then get stuck. And so they might do a proof of concept in a couple of areas. They might spend 6 months trying to get that first proof of concept into production, but then they're kind of lost then as to how do we do this at scale? How do we really ramp up the use? And that's where the problems start to come in. I believe.
They call you, Andy.
Well, hopefully, yeah, I'm available. I'm open to offers, but I think that's some of the challenge. Other companies will be honest and say we haven't got a clue what we're doing. Let's bring someone in to help us on the start. But a lot of companies, because actually, when you think about it, longer term, the AI algorithms are going to be the crown jewels in the company, right? That's the core IP. So actually, they don't really want to bring in externals to do that. They want to learn and own it themselves. So I think it's right for them to want to do that. But I think the challenge is developing AI is very different from developing other types of technology. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate those differences from the get-go. And that's where they get into trouble.
So let's look into the future, right?
Yeah.
5 years from now.
Okay.
What percent of the companies do you think are going to have AI deployed? Neural nets. I mean, it really.
I think it will. I think it will be, at least a third, if not more now, because I think what's happened. One of the. It's difficult to say this, but maybe one of the positive things to come out of the coronavirus is that companies are looking at digital transformation a lot more seriously. And I think as part of that, they need to look at automation and intelligent capabilities. So, I think there will be more emphasis on what can we use technology for to help deal with these difficult times and challenges that companies have faced. So I think there's more focus now on digital transformation, and as part of that, it's automation, it's AI. So I think the adoption will increase in the next sort of few years for sure. And I think what you'll see, not just the really large companies, but the sort of medium-sized companies will start to explore as well, who maybe wouldn't have looked at it beforehand. So I'm very optimistic, as I would be, about the increase in adoption of the technologies over the next sort of 5 years. I think most firms will need to not necessarily understand the technology, but look at how they can use it to help their businesses be more efficient.
Definitely. Yep, definitely. So we go, if we look at it in the future, so 10 years from now, 90% of the companies will have it. And if we look at it today, there's such a big opportunity for those startups that really want to start focus on some of those areas to really grow, right?
Absolutely. It's massive, I think. And I think for one of the challenges you see with startups is that they might have some smart tech, but they're desperate to get a customer because the customer has the data. And you see a lot of small sort of, for example, in the financial services, a lot of small fintech startups trying to work with the big banks and the big companies, but the startups are working at a lot faster rates than the big banks are. And so there was always that difficulty. I think now what's going to happen is much smaller companies are going to want to use AI technology, and that will be better for the startups because the smaller firms can run at a faster pace that suits the startups better. So I think it's going to be good for AI startups because they will be able to work with slightly smaller firms that are keen to use the technology but don't have the expertise in-house to apply it. And I think there'll be a good opportunity for the startups to maybe work with the next tier down of size of company that are more open and appreciative of the technology and the skills that startups bring to them.
Oh, that sounds great, Andy. So where do you think, if you look at an AR and VR and AI, where do you think, how do these relate together? Where do you think in terms of this whole digital transformation?
The sort of AR and VR capabilities, right? Because that way to augment the workplace, for example. So being able to support whether it's a surgeon or whether it's some maintenance crews needing to sort of understand a particular type of system that they're needing to fix or whatever, having that augmented reality that can sort of recognize the component, bring up the specs, sort of play a little video of how you're meant to sort of fix that particular thing. I think that's fantastic, and definitely there will be that fusion of AI capabilities from a sort of visual analytics perspective to provide that sort of immediate support and information that people need sort of right there is great. And I think there'll be lots of benefits for that for sure, because often you don't want to have to send the maintenance crew back to base to get the manual to blah blah blah. So there'll be lots of efficiencies being driven from that kind of technology. Absolutely.
You talked about the digital transformation. What, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, Zoom had like 30 million daily users, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 300 million users. So this whole digital transformation, the way people are doing business differently. I mean, you talked about a little bit about AI's role in helping the digital transformation. I mean, where do you see where there's opportunity? If you take the top 3 opportunities for companies today, where would you see those opportunities in this digital transformation?
Sure. And actually, for Zoom, that's a perfect sort of example of right place, right time, right? So they've one of the companies to sort of massively benefit from that push to remote working, etc. But yeah, the top 3 opportunities. Wow, that's a great. So I think everyone will have. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier. A personal assistant that will be helping us in our day-to-day job. So I see a world where each of us has an on-the-job AI agent that will be taking a lot of the dull, boring, repetitive bits of work that we kind of have to do, but isn't really huge value for us. And being able to shoehorn that off to a system that can, it loves doing that, right? It'll do that 24/7. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So I think I think every job, regardless of what role you do, will have a augmented assistant that will provide you the ability to allow us as individuals focus on the more interesting, challenging parts of our jobs and just leave all the dull, boring stuff to automation. I think that's going to be a game changer for everyone. And I, there will be some roles and jobs that will be fully sort of outsourced, if you like, to automation and AI, and that's part of the challenge of this whole sort of transformation. But I think for the majority of us, our works will change because we'll be using digital assistants, we'll be using those kind of technologies to help us. I think the other interesting area for companies is there's been, through the organizational structure and through that sort of way of only sharing knowledge to the sort of the top stakeholders, I think that's going to change a lot. So I think the decision making will come further down the organization because they'll have access to more information and more analytics that they can make the informed decisions, rather than letting a manager higher up in the organization that's so far removed from the day-to-day process won't necessarily make the right decision. So I think that sort of making information more widely available to the whole organization, so that decisions
top down, it'll be really throughout the organization.
Absolutely. So I think that's going to be a massive shift in how organizations operate as well. So you've got this AI agent that's sort of helping you be more efficient on your day-to-day. You'll have more access to information and knowledge that we can all make quicker, better decisions. So I think those are two of the key things. The third one, well, I don't know, is the third one. I think you'll see, what I'd like to hope to see is that companies will not be just using AI to make their current processes more efficient, but they'll be using AI in their products and services and actually coming up with new amazing things that they can offer their customers. So I think that's maybe the third area that they're not really thinking about at this stage. So a lot of the use of the technology is internally. How can we be more efficient? How can we reduce our cost of customer service? That's all great. But actually, AI is a great way of delivering new services and products. And I don't think that's coming through yet. And I think that will be the next sort of wave of innovation that we'll see going forward as well.
What do you think, Andy? There are now some incredible technologies, including coming from Google, that can actually do things like write music, right? In the style of. And what do you think? I mean, it's like, so I want to listen to Jimi Hendrix, the oldies. I want to listen to Beethoven. And I actually, in the style of, what do you think? I mean, are books being written? What do you think about that?
I love the whole concept of the sort of creative capabilities of AI, and a lot of people sort of are quite wary about it, and say that music created by an AI agent isn't is soulless, doesn't really have a real sort of heart to it, if you like. And I think that's good feedback, I think, at the moment. But I think it will be very interesting when you get that sort of capability to create music in the style of, and definitely with musicians that have sadly passed away, being able to create a new Prince album or whatever, I think is quite amazing, right? But it opens up a whole host of intellectual property right issue. Where should the royalties go for music created by an AI agent that has been trained up on the but it's been trained up on the back catalogue of Prince's music, right? So is it the guy that's trained the algorithm, or is it actually Prince's estate because it's his data that's being used? So interesting dilemmas there, I think, but fascinating to be able to do that. But of course, it then opens up the whole sort of fake news and all of that. That's kind of.
I was going to say, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So while it's a wonderful, and this is the beauty of any technology, I think, that you can use it for good and bad, right? And I think there's some wonderful, brilliant things you could do with it, with the right sort of checks and balances. But there's also a whole host of really bad things that could come out of it. So
thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, okay, so I could take a video of Donald Trump and make him say something that he hasn't said. Well, actually isn't difficult because he says so much stuff anyway. That's a different point, right? Yeah, that's a different point. But, being able to fake that kind of thing and push that out onto social media, and, it's very dangerous, right? And I think it's interesting. I was actually thinking of creating a startup that could actually identify
exactly. That's what I was going to say, right? There are startups to identify what's fake. And what about like certifications, like on a video saying this is a certified, not deep fake, somehow certifying it digitally? It's a great point. And I think, in many ways, it's a bit of an arms race in terms of, the bad actors that want to create all these fake capabilities. And in fairness, right, a lot of people that are doing this are doing it because they want to learn the technology and actually want to figure out what it's capable of. So, like the sort of script kiddie hackers of the olden days where they're just trying to learn their trade, as it were. There's some benefit for people doing this, but I think
it needs some sort of controls, and how that's done is again, there could be an opportunity there that might be a way to sort of figure out which videos are legitimate, which aren't. So yeah, it's a really interesting area, I think. You think a company like Google with YouTube might be exploring this kind of thing.
Exactly. I mean, that, and if they're not, startups and VCs, it's a good opportunity to find somebody to invest in that's doing it. Because
I think it is, right? And I think it's one of those things, if you can't beat them, join them, in the sense, because the technology to identify fakes is probably not too dissimilar from the technology that's creating the fakes in some way. So it's probably not that much of a stretch to create something that can identify these things. But these things are going to get better and better, and it's going to get more and more difficult to identify the fakes. I mean, for all you know, I'm an AI agent running now, and you've got no idea that it's not really me, and it's my sort of avatar that's creating my image, right? Could happen one day. It's not right now. I'd love to be able to say,
in the company, you could just write me.
yeah, exactly, right? But it's all possible, right? And I think this is where a lot of people, from an AI ethics perspective, say, well, just because it's possible doesn't mean you should do it, right? And I think this is where it gets really challenging. And I think the whole area of facial recognition and the applications of that technology, again, there's some wonderful examples of great applications of facial recognition, but there's also potentially some really nasty ones as well, right? And I think we have to figure out how we navigate this. But what I would say is, this isn't just an issue for AI technologies, right? This has been a problem for technologies in general. There's good ways and bad ways of using tech in general. AI is just the next iteration of the most cutting edge technology, but we've had these kind of issues for a long time, right? So the fact that we get spam email is a result of technology being used in a bad way, right? And we've kind of got to accept that and built systems to deal with it. But fundamentally, it's the same problem, right? It's bad, people trying to exploit technology in a way that they think is great because they're making money from it. But for the rest of us, it's a pain,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember a number of years ago when e-commerce was just really starting to take off, and people said, I'm never going to buy stuff online. I don't trust it. How do I know that's a store? And now, with the digital transformation, it's like, why would you waste your time going to the store? I can buy it on Amazon, or I can buy it on Walmart or Tesco or whatever. Why in the world would I go to the store? It's crazy. It changed.
And that's been another benefit, over the coronavirus, because, online shopping has been a lifesaver for us all, right, over the last sort of 3 months when we've been in lockdown. So, it's an interesting, and I think it's also about how we trade off our personal privacy for convenience as well, right? So there's a whole area around that, and I think gradually, if we can get to a point where and it's an interesting one, because we value our privacy and our data, but there's value to it. But if I'm getting good services by trading my privacy, then great. But I think there's been, with Facebook and some of the issues around sort of data privacy over the last year or two, the balance of power is too much in the favor of the big corporates and not in the individuals. And I'd like to, maybe there's another great opportunity there for a startup to try and readdress that balance and put the power of our personal data in the hands of us as an individual, to permission that out to people or to companies that we want to have data to provide a much better service. Because I don't know, I'm absolutely bored of getting really bad targeted advertising. That really annoys me, right? Again, it goes back to the tech should be smarter than this, right? If I'm giving away all of my personal data by using these social networks, etc., you'd think they'd be a lot better at targeting adverts at me rather than just finding the thing that I've, the last thing I bought or searched for. So and again, it goes back to that personal sort of assistant that knows all of my preferences and
Another
wants.
opportunity for all of us, right?
Yeah, definitely, right? So I think there's a ton of opportunity, right, in terms of how do you squeeze the knowledge out of the data we have, and it's the tip of the iceberg at the moment. So I think there's a ton of opportunity over the next decade for so many different things, and some of these ideas we've talked about are massive, right? If you get that right, it's the next unicorn, right? It's the next big thing. So there's plenty of
look at the data that's coming at us all the time. What did they say? I read about a year ago that for 2 years, the data that came out was as much data in the last 2 years, as much data had been time of the recorded history to that point. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy, right? And I think, and that's partly because we're now all doing podcasts and video sort of publishing. So all of that extra data and volume of content that we're creating is just exploding. And again, all of this data is being stored and, maybe not properly used and leveraged, but it's insane, right? And I think it's only going to get worse, and again, plenty of opportunities there to how can you exploit all of that data that and I think even the big firms like Google, they must be sat on so much data, and increasing at vast amounts on the daily basis. And I'm sure they're not even scratching the surface on what they could do with it and leverage it. So, yeah.
So what do you say in closing thoughts? Tell people how they can get a hold of you. What do you think over the next year? So what would you focus on over the next year, and how do people get a hold of you?
So people can get a hold of me very easily. So my website's called pardoe.ai. So just go there and you can sort of contact me. I'm on LinkedIn, all the social platforms as well. So I hope I'm relatively easy to sort of get in contact with. But in terms of trying to sort of close this out, and maybe going back to the actual title of the talk that we started with about sort of the new business models for AI. Right. So I truly believe there's big opportunities, and actually AI startups are risking devaluing what they're delivering to businesses because they're not thinking about the full value of what they're delivering. So rather than just thinking about it as a sort of software as a service capability, you're delivering so much value to your customers. You're making them more efficient, more accurate. You're saving them a ton of time. And I'm not sure you're fully pricing in all of those benefits into the offerings. And I think there's, I truly believe there'll be a real shift to that value-based way of pricing in for AI specifically. Startups. So, yeah, I think so. I think that's going to be massive. And I think as much as there's a lot of work at the moment about targeting verticals and how the applied AI, I think there's plenty of opportunities, as we've sort of highlighted, for maybe some bigger thinking around the sort of the emotions, the morals, the ethics,
silos, right? Moving out of the silos. I agree. I think we're really, as I said, AI is a new electricity, and the companies that embrace it are going to have a traumatic impact on our lives. And the companies that don't, I mean, think about it, at the beginning of the 20th century, look at all the things from how much better your home life was, manufacturing, agriculture, I mean, just across the board. And that's really where we are today. And you're right on, Andy. The amount of data that's around us, I mean, the problem is we can't manage the data, whether it's a corporation or in our own personal world. It's just, what did Toffler say? Infobesity. Remember, Future Shock. We're in a stage of obesity. And the thing is, we've got to do something about it. So as Andy said, anytime you can synthesize that data, and whether you've got your little mini-me assistant that's a replica that's helping you, I mean, it's going to happen. It's already started. I mean, the evolution has started now. It's just we don't see it. It's step by step. So that's going to happen. If you got money, want to invest, look at those kind of companies. We are in a state of infobesity, and it's got to be that we've synthesized it to make our lives and the world a lot better. So, it's great having you here. I appreciate you talking about a lot of topics. I mean, I hear it every day. It's great to have a guru like you to be able to share your background and your thoughts. I really appreciate you taking your time.
It's been a brilliant conversation, and I'm sure we could speak for another 4 hours if we could. So
I think a lot longer than that. And
I think so. So absolutely. So we've only really sort of scratched the surface, but yeah, it's great, and I love this topic. I love talking about the future and where we're going to go with it, because I think it's super exciting, and we're really at this interesting inflection point where we're moving away from data and information to knowledge, and I think that's the key, and that's that's where all the opportunities are going to be. And
data, information to knowledge. I love that. I love that. So,
I think it's true, and I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities and some amazing new capabilities coming in the next sort of decade, or sooner, for sure. But yeah, it's been fantastic conversation.
Yeah, we got to get you on the show again. We really appreciate your support. You're a great man, the guru of AI. Thanks for coming on our show. Appreciate it.
Very welcome. All the best. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.